After devouring the child, the demon Andromalius returned to his cave, which was quite far from the city of Underdog, as he did not want anyone to find him while he was enjoying his meal. At the same time, moonlight began to penetrate into the cave through holes in the ceiling. Inside the cave, demon Andromalius sat on his stone chair. Next to his chair was a small table made of stone, and the floor was filled with remains of skeletons from children who had been devoured by him. On the stone table next to him, there was a black raven alongside a bottle of wine. While Andromalius held the red wine glass in one hand, he told the raven that it still wasn't enough. Then he placed his hand under his chin and began to gaze at the lake in front of him. Slowly, he brought the red wine glass closer to his mouth and explained to the raven that no matter how much he thought about it, human supply was not sufficient. He asked the raven if it would be better to raise humans like livestock and create an organization to devour children whenever he pleased. The raven that was on the stone table had 3 demonic eyes, and it was also a demon that had taken the body of the raven. Andromalius looked at the raven and addressed him as 8, asking for his opinion on raising humans. The demon disguised as a raven also belonged to the 10 elite corpses of demons and possessed the 8th corpse, but the name of this demon was still a mystery. 8 noticed that Andromalius had only been eating children, so he asked him to be careful not to emit any odor since the Baskerville bloodhounds had a good sense of smell. Andromalius closed his eyes and put his hand behind his head. While holding the wine glass, he told 8 that this was annoying and also reassured him not to worry about it because he had already set a trap and no one could enter the cave. He slightly tilted his head towards 8, and while holding the wine glass with one hand, he pointed at him with the other and explained that at this rate, in order to gather enough magical power to open the door, he would need to suck human blood for 12.5 more years. Upon hearing this, 8 realized that Andromalius was still considering breeding humans, so he warned him not to stir up something that wasn't worth it among humans. He also asked if there was anything else going on inside Baskerville. Andromalius looked at 8 with one eye and replied that there wasn't, and added that he was doing fine. Then he asked 8 to make sure everything was okay with the morgues. 8 began to look aggressively at Andromalius, and slowly started to dissolve his body. He told him not to worry and added that they, the 10 elite corpses, only needed to focus on opening doors that would lead to the ruin. After all, they were the links between the human and demonic realms. Andromalius looked towards the table and saw that 8's body turned into a black liquid. Just before disappearing completely, he explained to Andromalius that all of this was for the downfall of humans and the 10 elite corpses. The black liquid began to spill over the edges of the table, and as Andromalius was watching it, he remembered 8's words when he had asked if something was happening inside Baskerville. He brought the wine glass to his mouth to take a sip, and while looking at the floor, he thought that there was no way he could mention that Hugo had become an idiot because of his granddaughter. To weaken the Baskervilles, who represented a threat to the demon's plan, they needed Hugo to maintain his coldness. Andromalius needed to make sure that Hugo continued treating the young Baskervilles as perishable goods, so he wouldn't cause a commotion when he took them. After finishing his glass of wine, he stood up and moved away from his armchair. He thought that this wouldn't interfere with the plan, but still, he didn't know if it would work out. He put one hand in his pocket and with the other started touching his hair. While looking at the ceiling with a murderous gaze, he thought that Hugo had changed because of Vicar Van Baskerville's influence. He thought that Annoying Boy had survived when the venomous snake was released when he was younger. He had thought it was great when he died in the forest, but to his bad luck, he returned from the forest. And not only did he return alive, but also brought Hugo's granddaughter with him. He began biting his thumb as he had done so much to destroy Hugo, and while biting his thumb, his demonic eyes started to shine as they were reflecting the inner rage he felt at this moment. Andromalius thought that his assumption had been correct and believed it would be good for the demons if he got rid of the problem once and for all. At the same time, in the main house, 2 people began to walk down the hallway. One of them was wearing an elegant white suit, while the other person was wearing an elegant black suit. The person wearing the white suit was Hugo, and the person wearing the black suit was Vicar. They both started walking together down the hallway, creating suspense in the atmosphere. Neither of them said a single word and simply continued walking. Seeing that Hugo wasn't saying anything, Vicar looked at him and thought that he had summoned him to talk. But they had been walking in silence for the past 5 minutes. Vicar began to wonder why Hugo had suddenly summoned him. Now that he was walking by his side, he realized that he was full of openings, and this was an opportunity that would not be repeated. He thought that this was the perfect opportunity to kill Hugo. Instead of taking advantage of this chance and seeking revenge against him, Vicar simply closed his eyes and thought that if it were him in the past, These would have been his feelings, but now he had completely different feelings. As he was immersed in his thoughts, Hugo caught his attention and told him that he was going to be honest with him while they were walking. He closed his eyes and revealed to him that he knew he hated him. Upon hearing this, Vicar looked at him in astonishment and began to wonder what was happening. He quickly thought that Hugo had sensed his murderous intent. Hugo looked down at the ground with a sincere look and explained that he was a father who referred to his children as hounds and put them all in dangerous situations. He had always thought that his children despised him. Both stopped walking, and Hugo revealed to him that he had been cruel to him since he was young, even though he did everything right. He also added that the hatred his children felt towards him was a burden to bear. He also revealed that all of this was due to his revenge against the barbarians, and it was also his negligence in only knowing how to live by showing his own anger. Vicar looked at Hugo with eyes of surprise and thought there was no way Hugo could be speaking ill of himself, and quickly he thought that he was confessing and trying to test him. But to his surprise, Hugo le Baskerville himself apologized from the bottom of his heart. Hugo stood in front of him and while looking at the ground, thanked him, and upon hearing this, Vicar was speechless. While Hugo was looking at the ground with a lost gaze, he explained that Pomeran had told him that Penelope was happy until the end of her days, and his heavy heart was relieved a little to know that his daughter had not been unhappy during her final moments. He felt that by meeting Pomeran he had been saved. Hugo knelt before Vicar and thanked him for bringing Pomeran to him. As a form of gratitude, he allowed Vicar to obtain anything he desired, and also added that this was not a reward from Bloodhound but a gift of appreciation on his part. Upon seeing this, Vicar couldn't believe what was happening. Hugo, a person who only cared about himself, was expressing his heartfelt gratitude. After regressing, Vicar had a vague suspicion. A few years ago, when he was little, he went to Hugo's office, and when he turned around, Hugo asked him to do well in the midterm evaluation. Upon hearing these words, Vicar was speechless. With a sincere smile, Hugo looked at him and asked him not to lose against the direct bloodline. A few years later, while Vicar was fighting, Hugo appeared and ordered them to stop as it would be dangerous to continue. After a few years, while Vicar was recovering from his injuries, Hugo explained to him that in combat, being cautious would only lead to an injury. He also told him that this injury should become a lesson. After some time, Hugo addressed Vicar as his son and asked him not to do anything reckless. All these memories made a question come to Vicar's mind. He began to wonder if the Hugo in front of him was different from the Hugo he knew. He came to the conclusion that the cold Hugo no longer existed, and this was something strange that had happened after his regression. But because of this, he was even more confused. For the past 17 years, Vicar had only been thinking about his revenge but had always been able to forgive him. He realized that the person who had incriminated him was not Hugo, but the person who ordered his execution and did not trust him definitively was Hugo. While Vicar was looking at Hugo, who was crouched in front of him thanking him, he thought about the words revenge and forgiveness. He stared at Hugo intently and began to wonder which one he should choose first. Vicar addressed Hugo as the patriarch and asked him to please lift his head. Hugo listened to him and slowly began to lift his head. Vicar's thoughts at that moment were about finishing what he had to do. Once Hugo lifted his head, Vicar asked him if he could ask for anything as a reward. Hugo looked into his eyes and replied that of course he could. Upon hearing this, Vicar asked for what he wanted as a reward. And after asking him what he wanted as a reward, he thought to himself that he would decide later what to do with Hugo. At the same time, in the garden of the main house, someone was fixing Pomeran's hair. The man who was fixing her hair asked her if it wasn't great to be in Baskerville. Pomeran looked to one side and with a pleasant smile, she responded yes because her uncle Vicar, Grandpa Hugo, and Uncle Osiris were here. Not hearing his name, the man asked Pomeran what his name was. She looked at the man and while touching her cheek, she began to think. The person fixing her hair was Andromalius, who was disguised as Set. Pomeran pointed at Andromalius and with a smile said that he was Uncle Set. While Andromalius was fixing Pomeran's hair, a maid appeared and with a smile asked Set why he hadn't started his isolated training yet. Andromalius looked towards the maid and with a smile replied that he wanted to see his niece before starting. The maid approached Andromalius, standing right behind him, and explained that the patriarch had told them that nobody should approach young Miss Pomeran. While Andromalius was fixing Pomeran's hair, he asked the maid to keep it a secret that he had been here, and he also asked Pomeran to keep it a secret. She smiled and replied yes. Andromalius took a strand of Pomeran's hair and complimented her on having beautiful hair. As he was looking at the strand, he closed his eyes and with a smile told her that her hair reminded him of his sister Penelope's hair. Upon hearing this, the maid was in shock and asked Set if he had met Miss Penelope before. She also added that, to her knowledge, he hadn't been born then. Asking this question created tension in the air. After several seconds, Andromalius realized the mistake he had just made and thought that if someone were to find out about it, his true identity would be exposed. Set's head began to slowly open from the back, and the demon Andromalius started to emerge. With the only eye that Andromalius had, he stared at the servant and told her that her father had been looking for her. The demon began extending its tentacles towards the maid and told her she should hurry and go see her father as soon as possible. While she was watching the tentacles approaching her, she was unable to move and was devoured by the demon. Pomeran, upon seeing that Set had stopped fixing her hair, turned around and noticed that Set was alone and smiling. She asked him if Grandma had left. While the demon Andromalius was returning inside Set's body, he smiled and explained to Pomeran that the maid had something urgent to attend to. He also asked her if she liked Grandpa Hugo. Upon hearing this question, Pomeran looked at the ground and started blushing, replying yes. Andromalius revealed to her that he believed her grandfather really liked Pomeran a lot. He started staring at her intensely with a demonic aura and told her that she really resembled Hugo's wife and his deceased daughter. She didn't pay much attention and kept playing, and little by little Andromalius began to bring his hand closer to her head, and the skin of his hand started to break, letting out the teeth of the demon. Both hands of Andromalius split in half, causing the demon to come out. Slowly, he began to bring his hands closer to Pomeran's head and wondered how much Hugo would be destroyed by the death of his beloved granddaughter. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, don't forget to subscribe and like the video.